Welcome back to the Daughters of the Moon podcast. We're grateful that you can join us for another week.
We just sure are.
And we have Michelle Agopsowicz with us. She has a master's in social work, a bachelor's in disability studies, and is a Reiki master. She offers counseling and education opportunities from a holistic trauma-informed perspective. She aims to create wellness and balance through the integration of traditional counseling and mindfulness techniques. This approach has developed through her own journey of having an autoimmune condition, trauma, and anxiety. She offers practices and discussions that can guide us to live a more fulfilled and authentic experience with self-compassion. She believes strongly that trauma is a universal human experience that affects the body, mind, and spirit. She believes that addressing our suffering leads to a journey that is beautiful, painful, and ultimately reconstructs our fundamental meaning of compassion, humanity, and our place in the world. So, welcome, Michelle. We're really happy that you can join us
Yeah,
today.
thank you so much for having me.
So, how did you get started in this journey? You say that you started off with an autoimmune, so that's kind of what moved you in this direction?
I would say that that is probably actually maybe more close to the end of the journey or the catalyst of the journey in some ways, because I think there's always this long and winding road, and I think the autoimmune condition is perhaps the symptomology that showed up that really taught me I couldn't continue to do what I was doing. So up until that point, I have a childhood history of trauma. I had been bullied. I have sexual abuse in my history. And just always, even a sense from probably birth, just being really highly sensitive and having a sense that I didn't belong in the world in the way that we're meant to belong in the world. And so I think I spent a lot of my time running away from that and a lot of my 20s wanting to get into counseling and doing those sorts of things. But in my 20s, I was on this mission to deny all feelings because I'd been taught at that point that I needed to suck it up. And that if I needed to if I wanted to be successful in the career that I wanted, that I was going to have to be less sensitive than I was. And so I spent a lot of my 20s trying to shut that down, going sort of into traditional learning, things like that, which I love. And then in my 20s, it all, or my 30s, it all kind of fell in on me a little bit. And so the people pleasing and the overachieving, I had disordered eating, I had anxiety, I was having panic attacks. And then it all kind of culminated in this autoimmune condition. And I immediately knew that the autoimmune condition had everything to do with the fact that I didn't know how to love myself. And my body was finally saying, well, then screw you. Anyways, it doesn't matter. Right. And so I felt like there was sort of this revolt. And I feel like that was probably when my spirituality came back to me too. I'd always been a really in tune little person. But I grew up in a family of atheists. And so my dad had a philosophy master's. We talked lots about the mysteries of the universe and existential questions and all sorts of things like that. But it was always in the context of this sort of scientific method. And so in my 30s, my mom had actually gone and taken Reiki level 1, said, I think this would help you with your stress levels at work. I went and did that, opened up a huge world for me, and then sort of started really integrating spirituality and holistic practice into the counseling that I was looking at. And I think given your name also of Daughters of the Moon, I'll sort of interject this. It makes sense in terms of your reader or your listeners, maybe. I'm a Virgo moon, a Pisces, or Virgo sun, a Pisces moon, and Aquarius rising. And so, and I think it incorporates the conflict I've had through my whole life of being too scientific for the woo-woo people and being too woo-woo for the scientific people and never being able to really find my way. And I feel like now in my 40s, I'm sort of claiming it. I'm a little bit more. I'm claiming that, yes, I'm out of the closet a little bit in terms of, tarot cards and energy work and the things that I think we know within counseling. Counselors can learn all sorts of fancy things, but the best counselors in the world, have a history themselves and come from this place where we're really channeling intuition. We're just using it in kind of an evidence-based way. And
Right.
so it's an exciting time to be in counseling too, because it's suddenly becoming a little bit more acceptable to be a holistic counselor too.
Yeah. And I think even counseling in general is getting rid of some of the stigmatism around it. Because it feels like for me, anyways, growing up, that was like, you didn't want to say that you had to go to counseling to anybody. And now it just sort of, there's still that a little bit of pushback, but I feel like it's a lot better. And I agree with you. The counselor that I see actually does a lot of the EFT tapping and the
Yeah.
hard math and some of that stuff. And that's one of the reasons I was drawn to her, because it does offer these other ways to find that peace for yourself.
Yeah. And what I think is really cool is science is starting to back up what spirituality has known forever. And it's starting to become this really nice marriage where we're not at odds with each other anymore. We're both talking about the same thing. We're both questing essentially for meaning.
Right. Yes, it's
Yeah.
true. I know with me, like when I'm a little bit more mature than you guys, but in my days when I was starting up, no one wanted to talk about it really. And it was just a magical mystery tour if you're a psychic sort of thing. But as years went on, I just stuck with it because I liked it. And it didn't matter what tried to pull me away from it, because every now and then something pulls you, strays you away, and then you find yourself back at it, and spirituality brings you back in and says, no, 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 you're going to
Yeah.
do this because you like it, remember?
Yeah. Well, and I think that is actually it's a good explanation for the trajectory of healing too.
Yes.
Like when I talk about trauma, I think we used to again have this idea that trauma happened to veterans, it happened to people who'd had sexual assault, it happened to other people, it happened to other families. And now we know it can be anything that overwhelms your system. And this healing journey means that you arrive at it and you get pulled away from it and you think you got it and then you don't have it. And then you come back at it and you look at it from another perspective. And it often comes sort of as epiphany because it seems like common sense. And you're like, oh, why didn't I think of that connection before as to why
True.
I am the way I am? And I
True.
think we do the same as you're really embracing this psychic piece. I think we come at trauma over and over and over again in this quest to understand, and we pick up little pieces of information along the way when we're ready.
That's right. And I think you talking about, your childhood and some of the things that you endured growing up, and I can share in some of those things. And I think that takes a long time to realize that you can connect that and be at peace with it spiritually. Because I grew up, well, Roman Catholic, Kimmy did too. And so that had a lot of stigmas that came with it. It's particularly, and I don't mean that anything bad to a Roman Catholic, but it came with a lot of stigmas, and it set us back in lots of ways, right? Especially me when I was younger. And from talking to people still today, I'm seeing that still happening. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
nice that
And
we're
then,
integrating.
yeah. And then I have the polar opposite where it was sort of, it would have been stigmatized if you had any of those kind of beliefs,
Yeah.
right? That's not logical. And, that doesn't fit. And so it's sort of both ends up of the spectrum end up at the same result.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it puts everyone in their closet in terms of claiming, even if you're not spiritual, the fact that every single one of us has intuition.
Yes, exactly. And I think that you're right when you've been through it, and you can have that empathy then, but then you are also right, I think, in the fact that you channel in when you're helping people because you're just so connected with that.
Very
Yeah,
true.
yeah, because you're reading that intuition, you're noticing someone's pulling away or pulling back, or you do have these moments where you're like, I don't know why I'm feeling drawn to ask this random question.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
Hmm.
why am I so
And
emotional? Or
Yeah,
you know,
why are all the hairs standing up on my back? Why am I
and
feeling strange about this, right?
yeah, and I feel like running hard in all the
Hmm.
directions, sort of thing, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to see it coming together, because I remember back in the day too thinking science and I'm because it always intrigued me, but it couldn't come together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yet there was so many things with the churches and all the different religions and that all sequence the same.
Everybody's talking about the same thing. The Catholics are talking about the same thing as the atheists, the same thing as the quantum physics, the same thing as the tarot reader. I think our fundamental purpose in life is to find meaning.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And however we find that meaning, I actually don't care how we get there, right?
As long as we get
As
there.
long as we find it. Well,
As
and
long
it
as we
is
get
a
there.
work in process, right? So we're
Yeah.
constantly trying to make ourselves better, or, you know, live more fulfilled, live more in joy and love and those things. And I think through recognizing some of these traumas, and I liked how you said it doesn't just have to be these major things that cause the trauma. It can be tiny little things that we don't even probably acknowledge on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I think one of the greatest traumas that we all have is sometimes a sense of not belonging somewhere.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That we
That's a
don't
big
fit
one.
in somehow, that we don't belong. And every single one of us is going to go through grief or divorce or a car accident or something that brings us to that moment
That's
where
right.
we're like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. And we pick ourselves up and we keep going. And I think every time we have those things happen, we do amend our story. Like, I used to tell this story my whole life up until my early 30s. I would basically introduce myself as, hi, I'm Michelle, I'm anxious. Because I had no other language for being a highly sensitive person, for what I was experiencing. And now it's like, no, I'm a person who experiences anxiety from time to time. I've had anxiety in the past, but I've amended the story so that it's not part of my characteristic.
Good.
It's not how I define myself. And I think we get this freedom to amend our stories as we go. I think we get stuck when we feel like we can't amend that story.
Yes. Yes. And
I agree.
So with the sense of belonging, then, is there ways that people can work on that to bring some kind of a sense of belonging, especially if they don't have, you know, close friends or family or those kind of things?
Yeah, I think some of this does come with age and wisdom as you start to realize it doesn't have to be the family you grew up with. It doesn't have to be the traditional friends. Doesn't have to look in a traditional way. This is what's exciting about the online world too, is we can actually find our people, and you can, you know, let your freak flag fly however you want to in whatever corner of the internet and find some belonging. But essentially, I'm going to say that belonging starts with us. That actually it doesn't matter if we belong anywhere else, if we belong in ourselves.
Right.
Because I think often we exile ourselves to belong with other people, to create this false belonging. Like, how often do we sort of go along with a story or gossip or get involved in something because there's a sense that we're connected with people?
Yeah.
When we're actually, it's just false connection. And so I think we have to first and foremost belong within ourselves. Our inner world has to be rich and fulfilling in some ways. And I do think that some of that comes with age. Some of it comes with healing. And I think some of it comes with vulnerability, because we all think we're sort of our own little island. But if we have the courage to share who we are and what we believe in the world, or what our story is, you'll almost always find someone else in the room who says, oh my goodness, you've just voiced what I've never been able to voice. So we might think we're at a cocktail party where no one has anything in common with us. But if we actually take the chance to share who we are, you will find someone else who wants to belong to that.
Yes.
That is so very true. That is so very true, because I know that you talked about maturity. I talk about maturity. It makes me feel better. Even though I know the relevance too. But anyways, to me, I find as I'm maturing, what I do is if I go into a conversation someplace and it just isn't something I really want to participate in, I find myself leaving the conversation very quickly and going on to something that's more into my vein of feeling comfortable. And that way I know I fit in versus just pretending I fit in, sort of thing.
Yeah. And I think that's where and I think that's where it intersects with boundaries, because I think as we get older, we do make more meaning of our experience. We do heal some of those traumas. And then what happens is we get better at saying, love you guys, but I'm going home because this actually isn't feeding my soul in that way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Did
what
you
I'm
know-
excited about, it does seem like people are having deeper conversations than they used to.
I think so.
Yeah, there's less small talk. Maybe that is one of the gifts of the pandemic, actually, is that in some ways, we didn't pretend we were all okay anymore. We got to say, actually, I'm drowning over here, and everybody, you know, and so then I think what I've noticed clinically as well as socially is that people seem to be more open to have deep conversations instead of fluffy conversations.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it.
That is a good way of putting it. And I have to say for myself, because of my personality and who I am and who I'm becoming, that feeds my soul to not have these pretend conversations, right? Because
Yeah.
it doesn't interest me because I feel like there's no connection there with that person. It's like you're making the niceties out of obligation, and we don't have to do that. We can just smile at each other and be on our ways.
Yeah. Yeah. My whole family sort of jokes about me, or my husband will nudge me and he's like, maybe don't lead with that. Because as a therapist, I'm sort of like, so what's the worst thing that ever, you know, I could be at a party and I'm like, so tell me your saddest memory and let's talk about that. Because that's way more interesting to me than many other things. Not that I don't want to celebrate the good things that are happening for people, but you know, sometimes I'll meet someone and he's like, you know, you may want to like, you're freaking people out a little bit.
Tone it down just a tiny bit. But that creates conversation though that is more engaging than just, you know, oh, so what'd you do today, right? Like, because I find that like, especially like at work in my job, it's like you're pulling teeth sometimes getting these conversations with people, and that doesn't interest me.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I'm interested. Yeah, I'm interested in what made you who you are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. What's your story? How'd you get here?
Yeah.
Which is why we started the podcast, because then we can ask those questions. Right? While you're a counselor, you can ask those questions.
Yeah. And I think the more chances we take to share some of those things, we also teach other people, well, if I'm not scared to talk about it, then we don't need to be scared to talk about it. No. Right?
Yeah, we don't have to put up false fronts.
Yeah.
You know, we can be ourselves. You know, I've always been, or not always, I have been accused in my lifetime to be too honest, speaking my truth sort of thing. But I find sometimes it's the best way because it may shock a person to go, whoa, she said that, you know. But on the other hand, if a person wants to be real with himself, they'll just say, well, yeah, that was true. Or whatever. And so I try to sugarcoat it a little bit before I say things sometimes, but I do have a tendency to just out of the mouth. I have thought about it, mind you, but it still comes out and just oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no. Yeah. But I also find with maturity, I laugh at myself easier.
Yes, there is the sort of, oh, well, I did that. It's okay. You know, I blundered through it and people love me or not, and it's okay.
I can't help it. I did it. Sorry.
Yeah.
You know,
I think we get better at sorry too. Right. So I think we get, you know, we come out with things more truthfully, and we're also more willing to say, yeah, I was wrong about that, because I think we also forget as humanity that we can change our minds about things too.
Yes.
Mid-sentence too.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I think we have to be forgiving to ourselves as well when we say or do things, because a lot of the times I feel like most people come from a really good spot, but things, you know, set us off, or things move us in different directions, and we do come out with some not so nice things. And, you know, forgive ourselves for saying it, you know, apologize to the other person when you've made that, you know, oh, maybe that was a little harsher, right? But I really do think in that forgiving, and where you said belonging in your own self, and that's sometimes a hard thing to do.
Yeah. And I think we spend a lot of time running away from ourselves, and being with ourselves can be quite scary, especially when it comes to trauma.
Yeah.
Because when we get
Yeah.
still, like, for myself, I like nothing more than sitting down and meditating and musing on it and doing Reiki and doing energy work and having that come through. But for people who have a really extensive trauma history, that can be like being thrown in the deep end. That stillness can't be trusted, right? Or this, to come back to our bodies if our bodies have betrayed us can be a really scary place. Because for a lot of people with trauma, you learn to survive by being outside of your body. You
Yeah.
learn that your body was something that couldn't be trusted. And
Yeah.
Mhm.
so, as much as I love the mindfulness techniques, I also caution people to wade in slowly because it can be scary to be still within yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that technology has played a role in some of this being able to be still and have that chatter? Because it feels to me, and I don't know, but like there's so much chatter all the time, right? With our phones and the social media and all of that. It just feels like there's so much of that that it's hard to find that still spot.
Yeah, I think it has to be very intentional, because we are literally getting biological functions happening when we feel like we have to pick up our phone again, right? So we are literally getting a serotonin, dopamine. We're getting a happy hormone hit, the same as if we go shopping or talk to a friend. And so there is that sort of immediacy of the noise, which silences our own intuition and stillness, but also, you know, comes with this happy hormone hit, which means we don't have to feel the pain for a little while, like even if it only lasts, 15 minutes. And then I think the same as everything, there's a duality in it because it also can create community and allow us to find the place where we do belong. Or, we now live in a world where we can Google what's happening for us and say, oh my goodness, this is what's happening for me. Like if I had had the internet when I was young and had stumbled upon the term highly sensitive person, I could have probably saved myself 20 years of suffering.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true. What we have learned over the years is unbelievable and it's awesome. And yeah,
Yeah.
it would have saved us a lot of trouble over the years. But I think as long as we're reflecting on it today, now, and we're getting healed, that's the most important part, right?
Yeah. And I think there's always this line between distraction and avoidance. To me, distraction can be healthy because it gives us a little break.
Yes.
Avoidance is another thing. And it's a very fine tipping line between distraction falling into avoidance.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a blessing and a curse, really, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think we have to learn how to, this is maybe going to be a skill as our brains change with technology, to have to actually learn how to turn it off. Because
yes.
we do get that addictive franticness, the fear, we do need the other hit, the next
Yeah.
thing that's coming.
Yeah.
There is this illusion that we're missing something out there, um, instead of recognizing in these four walls everything is safe and we're fine, right?
Exactly. So,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any tips on how people can deal with like just trauma or feeling that really overstressed or anything that you could share?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I teach about that I think is sort of a psychoeducational thing that helps people is maybe the window of tolerance, I think is a first starting point. I don't know if you guys have heard of that at all. So
No.
the window of tolerance is this place where we're in flow. And meditation and mindfulness, Reiki, energy healing, going for walks, lifting weights, exercising, music, all the joys of life sort of happen in that flow state that we're in the middle. When we have trauma, our window of tolerance shrinks, it becomes smaller. So when we're stressed, the window is smaller. When we experience trauma, the window is smaller. When we're grieving, the window is smaller. When we're in pain, the window is smaller. And what happens then is out the top of the window, we get the fight or flight response. So this is anger, anxiety, overwhelm, hypervigilance, feeling like we're startled all the time, like we have to be on. This is often the place where we feel like we need to check the phone and check the phone and check the phone and check the phone, that kind of thing. Out the bottom of the window, we have freeze and fawn as a response. So this is people pleasing, dissociating, numbing, which again, if we use the example of technology, would be the times where you realize you haven't looked at anything in the last 15 minutes. You're just moving your thumb up and down, right? And so there's the bottom part of the window. So when we learn to increase our window, we're less likely to hit the edges of it quicker. But when we're traumatized and carrying things around with us, we're more likely to pop out the top of the window. And then what happens, or the bottom, but what happens is if you pop out the top into anger and anxiety, you have to actually collapse down out of the bottom of the window to come back into flow.
Okay.
If you've dissociated and you're numbing yourself at the bottom of the window, you actually have to come up through the window to the top of the window to do something sort of agitating to come back into the flow. And that's sort of how, in a nutshell, how our nervous system works. So one of the things I like to talk about within the window of tolerance is that it's not pathologizing. What I like talking about trauma is we're not giving it a label. So if everybody has trauma, then, you know, it doesn't matter if you have the label of depression or the label of anxiety or the label of anything else. We're looking at every human on the face of the planet, including your babies, including your family dog or cat, including rabbits on the street, all have a window of tolerance. Mm-hmm. So if we look at we look at like rabbits or dogs, when they get scared, when they go into fight or flight, they actually shake themselves afterwards to discharge that energy.
That's true.
But as humans, or they'll stretch into like downward dog, or they'll do something to kind of discharge that. And you see that like in rabbits, if they're scared, they freeze. And then when the danger is past, they'll kind of hop and discharge that energy. But as humans, we actually don't have that built into our system. So we have to be intentional about discharging that energy. And that's where we come into increasing our ability, like working a muscle, to be in that window of tolerance. So whether we do that through music or nature or being with friends or whatever it is that fills us up. So then we start to learn to increase that window again so that the trauma might come in. Like today, I can talk about my sexual abuse history and I don't leave the window, right? Whereas in the past, I would have just always been at the top of the window with anxiety, having no idea why I was out of the window or that there even was a window.
Yeah.
Whereas now I'm like, no, I can talk about it objectively because I've made meaning out of it and I've done lots of things, which I'll sort of dovetail into in a second in terms of strategies. But I think it's important to understand that none of us can bypass the window. We all have one. And so it doesn't matter. So what happens within our brains is that we can have all the good strategies in the world, but if we get triggered, we actually leave the thinking part of our brain because our nervous system thinks, why aren't you running? And so we often have that where it's like, why didn't I remember to do all of my good strategies? But when we're stressed, we actually don't have access to that part of our brain.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah. So, which is why if like you're in a fight with your partner and you're yelling at each other and you walk away and you're like, I don't remember what we were fighting about. And I don't remember what his point was. And I don't remember what my point was. And I don't know how we got here. And I'm not even sure what I'm sorry for because we're not actually tracking each other. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, because of my trauma history, lots of the healing that I've done and that I do with clients has to happen through the body. So I love EFT tapping as a way to help people to meditate without having to meditate, because you are doing something meditative, but you're saying things out loud and you are touching the acupressure points. And so it's keeping your brain, your body, and your emotions busy all at the same time so that we can't get bogged down in any one thing at any given time. Because what happens when we meditate is sometimes we get into this beautiful flow state and sometimes we just make our grocery list.
Yeah.
And so what I like about EFT tapping is it keeps us distracted enough that we can stay focused on what it is that we're doing. And it works really well as a self-help technique. So once you've learned it, you don't need the therapist to guide you through it unless you want to, right?
Yeah.
I also do tons of narrative work around that meaning making and belonging. And I do lots of trauma work using eye movements. So there's EMDR, if people have heard of that, like eye movement sensitization reprogramming. It's a very big word. Or accelerated resolution therapy, or ART. These are all things that ask us to get in touch with our bodies, rate what's happening, and move our eyes while we're processing a trauma. And what it's believed that that does is that we're actually mimicking a REM sleep state while we're awake. So we're doing the healing thing that we have happen in our dreams, but we're in control of it. And we're going back to look at a trauma so that we can get new information about it. Because what trauma does is it robs us of a coherent narrative. So if we're 5 years old and our parents get divorced, a 5-year-old will automatically think, I stole a piece of candy at the store and then mom and dad got divorced and it's my fault. So our brain will connect all sorts of things that may not belong together. So what this helps our brain to do is look for all the other facts and all the other stories, so we can actually create new neural pathways while we're moving our eyes, thinking about the trauma and rewriting some of the story that's what happened. I'll use myself as an example. The first time I did EMDR, I was focusing on my sexual abuse. I burst out laughing and my therapist was like, what is going on? But I, for the first time, had realized it had nothing to do with me. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I happened to be available.
That's true.
It said nothing about my character. It said nothing about my sexuality. I hadn't asked for it. I hadn't done anything. I realized in that moment, and it rewrote my neural pathways so that I can say to this day, like, yes, that happened to me, but it actually had nothing to do with me. And so it allows us to come to these other realizations. And because we're working on an old memory, body sensations, eye movements, neural pathways, we're actually creating permanent change. So we have tons of research behind this in terms of they do MRIs on people and the brain looks different after we do eye movement therapy.
I believe that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to say, if I sprinkle in a little spirituality in this, something magical happens. So yes, we're moving our eyes, and yes, there's science behind it. And yes, there's thousands of research studies and variant scans to back it up. And something energetic happens in that room.
Yes, I would think so.
Yeah. Or people will have their eyes closed while they're processing part of it. And they'll be like, I feel like my dead mother is here and she's coming to give me a message. So there's something else. I've had feathers drop from the sky in the middle of EMDR sessions. Like, things happen, or clients are like, what was that? We sort of look at each other and are like, what just happened? Right. And so I believe it works like on all those good body brain sorts of things, and something mystical also happens in the midst of that.
Wow. That's really interesting. I think that, yeah, I can see why that would help. And, you know, it's funny because I think with trauma, as you have trauma, I think as you get older, if you don't deal with it, you also put extra stories in with your trauma of what happened because you're trying to make sense of it, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And your brain will just continue to gather evidence that goes in that file folder in your brain, whether it belongs in that file folder or not.
Yeah.
So you end up with sort of a trauma junk folder where your brain is connecting all sorts of things. And it'll do this. Like, if a dog barks at the same time as you're scared by something, you can end up with a phobia of a dog.
Yeah.
Right. And then every time you see a dog and every other time something happens, your brain just continues to say, see, that's right. That's actually.
Yeah. And that happened to me, actually. I was in a car accident. A drunk driver hit my door and I knew it was going to happen. Like, I was going through and I was like, he's going to hit me. I'm going to die. I heard a voice say, no, you're not. So there was some comfort, I guess. And so I went through, and when it happened, the way he hit my car door, I couldn't get out. And I went to get out. And since then, and it took me a really long time to realize that was where my claustrophobia came from.
Right.
But when it came to me, I was like, that makes sense of why I would feel that, because I was trapped all of a sudden, right? I couldn't get out the way that I would normally. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
so claustrophobia, so I still need help with that. But that's good to know that, by doing some of these things that can help those.
Yeah. And our brain has to work that way, because our brain has to know that if we look at a hand, that's a hand, and we don't have to learn what hand is every time.
Yeah.
So our brain does the same thing with trauma. It just says, oh, well, now that there's a car accident, you've been trapped, we're just going to put all the things associated with trapped together.
Yeah.
Right. So that you don't have to filter it every time, but then it becomes problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know even to this day, when I'm in that kind of a situation where it was just like that, the four-way stop, the way that it was, sometimes when I'm in that situation, not all the time, but sometimes I get that same panicked feeling come over me.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, you're not there. This is a different, like, let yourself just drive. You know how to drive, be careful, right?
But this is how a trigger works. If we go back to the window of tolerance, you're aware that you haven't maybe left your window of tolerance, but you for sure touched the top edge of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So I think that's helpful for people, because they can see how we have to flow through that and how to not come out the other side, but to start working on it. So
yeah. And I think also, again, I'm going to reiterate that healing isn't an endpoint. So our window doesn't become bigger and stay bigger. It's smaller, and then it's bigger, and then it's smaller, and then it's bigger. And it depends on the day and what's happening, and if we're hungry, and if we're tired, and if we're stressed. And that's part of humanity, because I think we also get under this illusion that we deal with something, we heal it, and then we never have to look at it again, or that suddenly we're enlightened now.
yes.
But we're only enlightened until we need to be enlightened to the next part.
Right.
And so, because I think we can get a lot of shame when it's like, oh, I thought I dealt with this already. And I seem to be struggling more than other people are struggling. Why can other people figure it out and I can't figure it out? Well, I'm going to tell you, none of us have it figured out. That's part of the lovely joy of the ride of humanity that we're on, is, we figure out a tiny little piece of it, and then we don't have it figured out again. And then we figure it out, and then we don't figure it out. Right.
Yes. Yeah. I've heard it's like a spiral. Healing is like a spiral, right? And which is why we wrap back around in it, because we don't know what's going to make us come back to that point of whatever it is that is ailing us, to be able to say, oh, wait, I haven't dealt with that part of it, right? I've maybe dealt with this, but not all of it. So
yeah. And we realize we've told stories, we have to amend stories, all of these different things. And I think, we'll pass over to the other side, whatever it is, and we'll go, oh my God, it was so obvious.
right.
But at least I don't need to worry about it anymore.
Exactly. And I find that, like, because I journal and I do some reflection and things like that on all kinds of different things. And, a lot of the past, right? Stuff you can't change, stuff that's happened. And then, questioning, and it's like, you can't know how you impacted everybody's lives. And I mean, you're not going to phone up somebody and be like, hey, Joe from grade 2, how'd I impact your life by saying,
Right. And half the time someone else is carrying around a story wishing we'd apologize for something. And we're carrying around a bunch of things where we're like, oh, I really should phone that person up. And if we do, I don't know if you've ever had this situation where I'll say sorry for something, and the other person goes, I have no idea what you're talking about. So we realize we're all carrying different things around in different ways with different meanings. And sometimes we feel like we've wronged someone and we're oblivious to it.
yes.
And sometimes we've wronged someone and we haven't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the same goes in terms of how we spread kindness in the world, right? Like, lots of times we have no idea the ripple effects of just who we are and how that's positively impacted people. And we'll have no idea
Yes,
the
I
amount of
agree with that.
joy we've spread in the world without knowing it.
I agree with that because I think that was one thing with the pandemic when everybody was wearing masks and you're out in public. Although I truly believe that the eyes are the windows of the soul. And when you smile
Yeah.
at somebody, you know they're smiling at you just by looking at
Yeah.
their.
And energetically, I actually never
Yes.
felt, I never felt disconnected from anyone. I know a lot
Yeah.
of people did. I never
Yeah.
felt disconnected. And in some ways, maybe this is my highly sensitive nature. I was like, it's kind of nice to go in here and not feel like everyone needs to talk to me.
Yes.
Because I am the person who jumps on transit and suddenly I'm doing a suicide intervention and hearing someone's life story, or, I'm the person who I'm in the line at the grocery store and people start. So I do feel like it gave me some energetic protection.
That boundary.
Everyone was actually staying within the realms of what I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
And yeah, I never felt really because I feel like you could still feel people's energy, but that's probably because we're people who talk about energy.
Yes.
There's lots of people who that would be a really foreign concept
Yeah.
for.
I agree. But I agree with you. You don't know how kindness spreads out. And, just by saying hello to somebody and holding the door open for them could make somebody's day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we did have some of that with like the pandemic and masking and things. I will also name that if you thought you never had trauma before, you've had it now. Because that was a collective trauma. We were all going through something we were unsure about one way or the other,
Yeah.
right? Our nervous systems were highly activated. We were just trying to survive, whether it was survive homeschooling or survive by work or survive because we were actually ill. We were all just surviving. And so I think what happened is I did, like, whenever I made sure I was smiling at lots of people. And that was actually kind of amazing when you looked over and it was like, oh, the two people who are smiling have now smiled, and we're having a little moment of connection. And it's still also nice to see people's faces.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm really glad for that too. Do you think that in some ways that trauma, as a collective trauma, impacted people that are having heavy trauma?
So here's the funny thing. People who've had heavy trauma, I think the same as anything, it'll go one way or the other. So one of the mysteries of trauma is how we can have two people have the same situation and one person will end up becoming quite resilient and overcome that. And another person can end up with lots of addiction and mental health and suffering. And we really don't know why. Like, two siblings can have completely different outcomes. And I would say the same is true for people who are really had trauma before. We've again got two camps. So we've got the people who are like, oh, this is nothing. I've done worse. I can do
Yeah.
this. Watch this. No big deal. And then we had the people who, it absolutely sent them spiraling further in to that crisis, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And so I think it can be both. And I think this is one of the mysteries of psychology is we don't know why one person okay and is one isn't. We don't know why one person with trauma is like, oh, nothing can touch me, I'm good. And another person, ends up relapsing over and over in hospital stays and just horrible suffering comes out of it.
Horrible stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you could leave our followers with one piece of advice or some inspirational thing, what would be your thought to
Yeah.
leave with them?
I'm actually going to use one of my favorite quotes that comes from Ram Dass. And he talks about this idea that we're all walking each other home. And so I think our job is to walk each other home. And I think about sort of growing up in a small town in the middle of nowhere that, we walked each other down dirt roads so that the coyotes didn't get you in the middle of the night, that we're all walking alongside each other. And we walk alongside some people for a while, and then we walk alone for a while, and then someone else joins us, and then we're alone for a little while, and then someone loops around and walks us the rest of the way. And so it's about walking alongside each other. It's about taking the risks to be vulnerable enough to share, to have someone walk alongside you.
True.
And that takes a lot of courage. It takes so much courage to heal. I don't want anyone to walk away today thinking that healing trauma is an easy thing.
No.
It's not, right? And so we have to tiptoe into it. And I say, just keep walking, because you will find your way through it. There is always light. Sometimes, if I use the metaphor of the path again, sometimes people are walking with us. Lots of times we've got a flashlight and we can only see a few feet in front of us. But if we keep walking, the next clearing comes, the house arrives, whatever we need along our way. So one of the things that comes from healing trauma too is we actually do start to trust ourselves again, because I do think that trauma increases our intuition
Yes.
and also robs us of our intuition.
Yes.
Or at least makes us second guess our intuition in a way, maybe, right? But I think intuition keeps lots of trauma survivors alive.
You bet.
Right. And so, there's a lot of healers that are trauma. There's lots of counselors that are trauma survivors because we know how to read the subtle cues of when something has shifted. Right. And so, yeah, I guess to everybody, you do belong. You belong to yourself. You belong to the world. Spread your light in the world. Keep walking because you'll get there.
Perfect. I love that. That's a beautiful message. So thank you for that. And can you tell everybody where they can find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube at Illuminated Path Counseling. I'm on Insight Timer, which is a free app for meditations and things like that. I've got a trauma recovery course you can find on my website, as well as a meditation course, a tapping course. I'm running a retreat for highly sensitive people coming up, I think sort of sometime in the fall. And so, yeah, please come check me out, reach out. I can clinically work at this point in Alberta and Ontario. Other than that, within our colleges, we have to be registered in certain places. So if you're in one of those other places, you can lurk and get advantage from all the courses and meditations. But if you want to work one-on-one with me and you're in Alberta, Ontario, I would love to have you. I work virtually. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. My mom had to step out because she's having a coughing attack.
Yeah.
But we really, really appreciate you being with us and sharing your knowledge with the followers. So thank you so much, Michelle.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I just love having these conversations about hard things.
Yes, me too. Me too. And I think it's going to give a lot of people some insight and some knowing that, there is paths that you can go down to do it. And with all that you offer on your site, I think people will find that they can tap into some of
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good.
But anyways, thank you so much. We really
Yes.
appreciate you sharing space with us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
And everybody else, tune into the next one.